I'm thinking about divorcing her.
My kids are out of control.
I'm not hurting anyone with my choices.
I thought they were my friends.
Should I quit my job?
I'm just gonna wing it.
I don't want to work anymore.
Follow your passion.
Believe you can do it and you will.
Everything happens for a reason.
Fake it till you make it.
Be yourself.
Take risk.
Never give up.
Back in the 13th century, the German king, Frederick II, conducted a diabolical experiment intended to discover what language children would speak if never spoken to. He had a hunch it would be German. Some things are just obvious, right? So the king took babies from their mothers at birth and placed them in the care of nurses who were forbidden to speak in their hearing. But there was a second rule that was imposed as well. The nurses were forbidden to even touch the infants. To his great dismay, Frederick's experiment was cut short, not before, however, something tragically significant was revealed regarding human nature. As you may have guessed already, the babies grew up to speak no language at all because they died. In the year 1248, an Italian historian named Salimbini recorded with an air of scientific observation, they could not live without petting. Astounding. The babies literally died for want of touch. Modern medicine calls this phenomenon failure to thrive. For some reason, we humans flourish under the influence of love and we gradually die without it. Anything that promotes feelings of love and intimacy is healing. Anything that promotes isolation, separation, loneliness, loss, hostility, anger, cynicism, depression, alienation, and related feelings often leads to suffering, disease, and premature death from all causes. Modern science is now proving through controlled studies that human beings are literally engineered for love. We're made for it, as if our very DNA contains the message, you must love and be loved in order to survive.
A while back, my daughter Milani told me about this experiment that she had come across on social media. And after she told me about it, I decided to look more into it and to see its validity. Not only did it turn out to be true, but there is evidence to support that this hasn't only happened once. There is speculation that throughout history, there has been different individuals and different civilizations that have done this to infants, isolated them. Now, the goal of this experiment, which is called the Forbidden Experiment, was to try to find out what language the kids would speak if there was never any interaction or ever any touch. Inevitably, what was discovered is that humans need interaction. There is a need for that to happen. There is a need for love. There is a need for relationship. And as stated in the opening clip, the human race seems to be engineered to be loved and to love. And in order to experience that bond of love, relationships have to be established. So 2 weeks ago, we talked about how during the creation of man, it was followed by the creation of his counterpart, the woman. And after the creation of man, before the counterpart of the woman, God says it is not good for man to be alone. In other words, creation is engineered with relationships in mind. There has to be relationships that are established. And we are to be in community or relationship with God and with others. As a matter of fact, if you go to Mark chapter 12, verse 30, the entire law is summarized as love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. And this law hinges upon principles that are meant to be established to teach us how to deal with broken individuals that we are, and how to establish meaningful relationships that are going to thrive. In other words, it's not simply let's build a relationship and let's just hope that it works out. The way that you build relationships that are meaningful is by loving the Lord your God, by loving your neighbor as yourself. However, as with anything good that God establishes with purpose, the devil has a way of distorting or even fracturing the beauty of the design. While most of us, if not all of us, have relationships outside of family, marriage, and parenting, truth be told, myself included, just like most people, we build our relationships, we'll say friendships, based on environment, circumstances, or hobbies rather than wisdom. And for most people in the room, you might be thinking, what's wrong with that? And I can tell you that building relationships based on your place of employment, based on your interests, what you like to do, or even building your friendships on people that you know, it's not a great idea in building friendships. I remember a pastor friend of mine once told me, he said, as a pastor, I give you this piece of advice. Build your friendships outside of your own church. And honestly, it's taken till recently that I actually really started to see the wisdom in that. Sometimes we build our relationships just based because that's the closest thing that we have to build a relationship. And once again, they like fishing, I like fishing. They like going to concerts, I like going to concerts. They like eating, I love eating, right? That's how we build our relationships. Now, the interesting part about when it comes to relationships or friendships, in comparison to every other decision-making area in our life, relationship building is at the top of the list. It has to be at the top of the list of anything that we're going to be talking about in the way that we live as fools, myself included. And sometimes you have to get hit blindsided to really recognize, man, I was really dumb in building that relationship. We often build friendships without giving it much thought, and only give it thought once the relationships begin to fail. Then we begin to think, okay, what's going on there? Ironically enough, what tends to happen during those moments is we focus on how the people failed us instead of trying to figure out how in the future we could form more meaningful relationships that are worth having. And I can almost say with certainty that everyone in this room has three things in common. We have all been hurt by someone that we considered a friend at one point. We have all hurt somebody that we considered a friend at one point. And we all have friendships in our lives that actually need to end. And that's a painful thing when you come to that recognition that it's like, you know what? This relationship is toxic and it needs to end. Friendships are tricky and they require wisdom because similar to marriage and parenting, while friendships are meant to function differently, sometimes our friendships function like marriages. Your friend is not your spouse. Your friend is not your kid. They're meant to function differently, but they're similar to the other two relationships because both contribute to its value or to its failure. We often see friendships as something that succeeds through trial and error. Let's see how it goes. Maybe this will work out, maybe it doesn't. But the truth is that the probability of its success, whether that relationship is good for you or not, doesn't reveal itself with time. It actually starts with a filtering process that we often ignore. We just don't even think about that filtering process. And the filtering process doesn't start by finding compatibility in your activities. Once again, it's not by trying to figure out, oh, they like doing the same things that I do. Let's go ahead and do these things. Those are really bad anchors in trying to build friendships. Because you could do the same things, but it will lead you to something catastrophic, as we're going to be talking about today. The way that it starts in building friendships is by paying attention to the warning signs that we often disregard that eventually lead to a fracture later in the relationship. And here's the social dilemma as we're talking about wisdom in relationships today. The social dilemma that we run into is we get to this point where we've been hurt by others to a point that we are apprehensive about building friendships that we know are necessary and beneficial, but we're apprehensive because they carry risks. We can get hurt in the process. What we begin to do is we begin to socially distance ourselves completely from people. We build a wall that no one can get past. And at times, we even become so reclusive to society because of it. We just don't want to deal with anybody because everybody in our minds is going to leave us the same. And this is where it gets difficult because we're created for relationship and we begin to distance ourselves from relationships. It turns and leads us to feeling isolated, rejected, and depressed because now we feel like we have no one. It's this vicious cycle of craving meaningful relationships that aren't going to leave you dry, that ends up turning into building relationships that are ignorant, that end up leaving you hurt and empty. I've said this before, and I'll say it again today. When I get up here and I talk about these things, I'm not talking about them because I've mastered them or I no longer struggle with them. As a matter of fact, as my wife and I were talking yesterday, this topic in itself is extremely relevant for us right now. Today's topic is no exception as to what I've said in the past. And I can tell you that it was a heartache yesterday as my wife and I were sitting here and we're going through the message because I'm the one that's speaking this that I still struggle with. And I find myself struggling in what relationships are worth keeping. And as a social individual who likes to get to know people, build meaningful relationships, and do life together with people, I can tell you that today's topic is extremely hard for me. And if we're keeping it real today, I've been the recipient of being hurt by people that I grew close to. And unfortunately, I've also hurt people who considered me a friend, if we're being fair. However, we often tend to focus at how others have failed us without owning up to how we have failed others. So today's message is really about both. Be careful who you trust your life to. Second of all, recognize when you've hurt somebody and be willing to admit it. Because what we tend to do in life is we often judge ourselves by our intentions and others by their behavior. And that's a great quote by Stephen Covey that speaks to this reality of the broken human condition. It's a tricky thing to do life with others because we often think about, well, this is the reason that I was doing it, and we just look at the intentions of others and say that's why they're doing it. In our minds, we're always right, they're always wrong. So whether you have found yourself being a bad friend, having unpleasant experience from those you once considered friends, or trying to figure out how to build meaningful relationships, today's topic is for us, myself included. So before we dive into the friends that we're talking about, all right, so we're talking about relationships, we're talking about friends, we have to make a distinction because the Bible makes a distinction when it comes to friends. In Proverbs chapter 18, verse 24, we learn that there are friends who destroy each other, but a real friend sticks closer than a brother. It's the same word, but there's a differentiation when you're trying to kind of get to the kind of friends that we're talking about. The issue that we run into is that we often experience hurt and pain from the first category of friends. The word friends is used as loosely as the word love. You can say, I love tacos, and in the next breath, say that you love your wife. Now, if your love for food, if your love for tacos is equivalent to the love for your wife, you're either Mexican or you're nuts, right? I mean, one or the other. But we understand that these are just exaggerated forms of communicating. These words are hyperboles that are meant to exaggerate communication, but it's not meant to be taken literal. It's just a very deep desire or a very deep craving that we equate to love because there's this exaggerated form of love. And when it comes to the word love, we understand we use it way too loosely, and we, Gina, can you give me some water, please? Sorry. We often use it very loosely, and we use this word love just like we use the word friends. And the word friend often falls under that same category of love. It is people we do life with that we consider, quote unquote, friends. They're our friends. Now, I would encourage you, if you're texting people and they're not really your friends, don't add the quotation marks to it. just simply say friends. But understand that even Jesus refers to Judas, who betrays him, as a friend. Matthew chapter 26, verse 50, when he tells Judas this, he's about to betray him. Judas is about to betray him. And this is what Jesus says, "My friend, go ahead and do what you have come to do." Judas was put in the friend zone. We have to understand that we often use this word very exaggerated when we get to meet people. They're friends. In life, we will all have people that at some point we'll consider friends. What we need to figure out is how to establish friends who become more like family. And I can tell you that within the church, we love that concept, but there's a lot of backstabbing people. Be careful. Many will claim to be like family. Many will claim to be loyal, but and they will say, we're here through the good, through the bad. It doesn't matter. We're loyal. So this is what Proverbs chapter 20, verse 6 says. Thank you. You're good. Sorry, my throat is dry. Okay. This is what Proverbs chapter 20, verse 6 says. Many will say they are loyal friends, but who can find one who is truly reliable? Right? We're understanding. We look for friends and we think everybody's a friend. Many will say they're loyal friends. There's a lot of people who are willing to say that they're loyal. And here's the difficult part about this characteristic of loyalty. It's painful. Loyalty can only be determined when things get difficult. It cannot be determined any other time other than when it gets difficult. Which means that loyal friends are filtered through the test of time and heartache. You've got to be hurt in order for it to really hit home. And you will have a bunch of people, right? That's what it said. You will have a bunch of people who you do life with, these friends that will claim to be the real thing. Hey, we're here. We're loyal. We're not going anywhere. We're here to stay. They're loyal friends until things get tough. And that's a reason that the question has to be asked in Proverbs. Who can find one who is truly reliable? When you come to the point of figuring out who is truly loyal and reliable, unfortunately, that is a time that you're going to find yourself in despair. It's going to be a difficult time. Because it is a moment that you will feel like you had a village to where at best it feels like you have a small circle. As a matter of fact, at this point you will likely be paranoid enough that you're going to be looking in every direction to see who's going to hurt you next. Loyalty of a friend that is significant enough, it's extremely difficult to find, and you will only find it in the trenches. But something that is crucial to understand is how loyalty of a friend begins to feel more like family, right? They stick closer than a brother. They stick closer than family. And we often look for friends that will agree with us rather than looking for friends who will make us better. This is probably by far the worst category of how we look for friends. Either we try to mold them to agree with us, or if not, we're simply looking for people that will agree with everything that we say. A real friend becomes like family that sticks around even in the midst of your messiness. It doesn't matter how messy it gets, we're here. But here is a key factor, quality that you have to look for in a friend. And we often don't look for this, we look for the opposite. Another key difference between a friend and a friend is this, that wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. Right? There's friends who ultimately will flatter you. They will tell you what you want to hear. They don't want to get you upset. A real friend is one that you can trust. Hey, go ahead and gouge me. Just drive the dagger. I know it's going to hurt, but I know that you're doing it for my benefit, not for yours. An enemy multiplies kisses until all of a sudden they can no longer multiply them because now they want their way. A friend is like a parrot, right? So when people look for friends, They're looking for parrots that they could actually train to pretty much say what they want to hear. A friend doesn't have to agree with you. As a matter of fact, they may even hurt you, and that's okay. But it's for the purpose of pointing you in the right direction. And here's the biggest thing. Once again, this is how you begin to determine whether they're friends or friends. They're pushing you in the right direction, but even in that difficulty and mess, they're going to continue to walk alongside of you. It's not my way or the highway. Again, friends like these are filtered through the test of time and seasons of difficulty and misery. But before you can establish friendships like these, right now we're talking about, that's kind of how you filter the family dynamics of a friend, where you just get to be close enough that you can share about your struggles and your difficulties. But before you can get there, there's two things. One thing that we have to remember is you can't expect for someone to be what you are unwilling to be to them. You have to be the friend that you're looking for. You're going to, in a way, you're going to attract what you're putting out. Which means that you have to be willing to be to others what you're wanting for them to be to you. Second, realize that who your friends are, and this is the biggest issue, especially with teenagers, because it's difficult trying to find friends, but even as adults, the longer that I'm in ministry, the longer that I see this, realize that who your friends are can easily be who you become with time. So you have to choose very carefully. Choose carefully who you're opening up to. Choose carefully who you're allowing into your lives. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 33 puts it this way. Bad company corrupts good character. You have to be careful. I've said this before, but in every relationship, you are either influencing or you're being influenced. Rarely in a relationship is it neutral, that nobody's influencing anyway. For this reason, building relationships is likely the most foolish thing that the majority of us do. That's the reason that I say it's the most foolish thing that we do, because we build our relationships based on nothing wise. We simply base it on interest. Or we work together, so they became my friends. Now, there's nothing wrong to wanting to befriend everyone, but you have to separate the quote-unquote friends. You have to realize, okay, there's people that I'm going to be vulnerable to. There's people that it's going to take time. And even as I narrow the search, there's going to be friends who will come out from that list that you're going to have to filter them out because they're not good for your life. But understand that you have to filter instead of keeping, because bad company corrupts good character. Friends are people that we associate with and do life with, and friends are those who we rub shoulders with, and that's where it has to stay, rubbing shoulders. You can influence by example without needing to influence by association, and this is something that I've heard teens say multiple times. Well, how can I impact people for Jesus if I'm not where they're at? If you have to go and be at a party that you might get arrested for because it's minors drinking, then you likely aren't influencing. At least you're not playing a huge influence. You could influence from afar. When you begin to spend time with people whose character begins to corrupt yours, it will only be a matter of time before you go from being part of the conversation that you guys are having to being the focal point of it. Let me put it a different way. This is the way that Proverbs puts it. A gossip goes around telling secrets, so don't hang around with chatterers. This is a really good verse. Oh no. This is a really good verse that kind of speaks to that reality of the difficulties of friendships. Thanks Jay, people who like to talk about others will one day be talking about you, so don't build your friendships with those people. That would be the easiest way to put it. And this becomes painfully obvious, especially the more friends that you have throughout time, friends that you have with time, this becomes obvious. Hey, you know what? If they're talking about someone else, more than likely you're going to be the center of that conversation later. And we understand this, but we rarely apply it. Gossipers seem to, if you kind of begin to see a pattern, gossipers seem to always be aware of everybody else's faults. Thanks, Jay. They're always aware of everybody else's faults. And then you begin to see that they are never at fault. They're always the victim or the source of the information, which is key, right? They always know. And at some point, this is the difficult part, and this is where the relationship starts to fracture. They know something about you that they will one day share with others. But don't hang around with them. You will go from being part of the conversation to being the focal point of the conversation. And it doesn't matter whether it's true or not. That's the way that gossipers and chatterers operate. And these are characteristics that people exhibit that become those red flags. That's your first filtering process. You see that? Run the other way. Don't engage. Not only are they traits that might end up causing heartache in the future, as you go from being a friend to being a target, but these are characteristics that, as already stated, they have the ability to corrupt you. You may very well become this without even seeing it. Without realizing it, you will begin to see yourself having more in common with your friends, and it's not just an interest. And you'll begin to see that maybe you don't only have things in common with them, but even your attitude towards life, towards things that they see, you will begin to see them the same way. And it's going to happen so subtle that bad company is going to corrupt the good character. It's subtle. Which is a reason for this nugget of wisdom. Don't befriend angry people or associate with hot-tempered people, or you will learn to be like them and endanger your soul. Are you seeing how the people that you're being friends with ultimately have the possibility to corrupt who you are? The book of James tells us that anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Anger never leads to making wise decisions, and that's painfully true, and some of us understand that from experience. As a matter of fact, anger will often lead to making foolish decisions, saying stupid things, or doing dumb things. It is in anger that people make grave mistakes that endanger the lives of others. It is in anger that relationships are altered. Again, in friendships, we are either influencing or being influenced, which is why there is a significant piece of wisdom. Don't associate with people whose character flaws can easily become yours. And I get it, it's difficult. And once again, you have to differentiate friends and friends. You can ultimately rub shoulders with friends and they have character flaws, but you're not doing life with them. It's very different. And as we have seen, as we've been going through this series on wisdom for the last 4 weeks, the heartache and difficulties that we experience in life are not derived from one decision or one event. The difficulties that we experience in every part of life are compiled from foolish decisions that we make, from our homes to our work to the church to parenting, and it's all filtering together and it's creating this misery. But it's because we don't know how to function. The dysfunction at home ultimately plays a factor, or the dysfunction in marriage plays a factor into the dysfunction in parenting. The dysfunction in parenting ultimately begins to play a factor in relationships, and ultimately it just goes round and round, and it's this vicious cycle. We're making foolish decisions every day, from our marriage to the household to our social lives. And the problem is that they don't seem that significant. They're little nuances. It's like, it's not that big of a deal. Or the other thing is we have no way of knowing. No, you do. Because the Bible makes it painfully obvious that there is a design, and when you don't follow that design, everything else will suffer. And as we look to the Bible, it becomes painfully obvious that as broken people, Every area of our life is fractured. Every area. It doesn't matter where it is, which is the reason that we need wisdom in how to operate in these things. Sin has affected every part of our lives to the point that the Bible addresses sin and we only see it as culture. We can't differentiate the difference between both. We think, well, it's not necessarily sin, it's just simply culture. And it begins to help us understand why it's so difficult to deal with these issues. We're not operating by God's design, we're operating culturally. And that's the reason that we can't see the issue. And there was many verses that I wanted to kind of tackle that really kind of help to paint a picture of what the Bible talks about friends that we shouldn't be looking for. But there's one passage that just really englobes all of it, and that's really where I want to end today. It's found in Paul's second letter to a young pastor by the name of Timothy, and he writes him this. You should know this, Timothy, that in the last days there will be very difficult times. For people will only love themselves and their money. They will be boastful and proud, scoffing at God, disobedient to their parents, and ungrateful. They will consider nothing sacred. They will be unloving, unforgiving. They will slander others and have no self-control. They will be cruel. They will hate what is good. They will betray their friends, be reckless, be puffed up with pride, and love pleasure rather than God. They will act religious, but they will reject the power that can make them godly. Stay away from people like that. And there's this not exhaustive list, but it kind of lays it out pretty clear. Hey, here's qualities that you probably shouldn't be engaging with. And as we're going to be closing up here soon, there's a lot of people within the church that fall under this category. That realistically, this needs to happen. Because they're rejecting the very essence of what could ultimately prompt godliness. They're not interested in the church. They're interested in acting religious. Stay away from them. Times have become difficult because the root of the problem has become normal. Hey, I mean, there's people that are worse than me. True. There's no shortage of religious people. They know what to do on Sunday while not exemplifying it the rest of the week. They fail to strive to live for Jesus. Lovers of money, lovers of self, arrogant, ungrateful, disobedient, gossipers and slanderers, no self-control, cruel, evil, friends who betray friends, careless, prideful, lovers of gratification, who act like they have their lives all together, but it's only in appearance, not in reality. I just pretty much summarized what that passage said. If you want to know how to build friendships, stay away from people like that. Because those traits that define them might very well be the traits that begin to define you. And within the mix of these red flags, there's two characteristics that are not good for the relationship that are essential in maintaining it. And I skipped them because I want to come back to them, but we are to stay away from people who are unloving and unforgiving. The reason this is key is because when you rub shoulders with people who exhibit any of these kind of characteristics and traits, it is natural for us to respond by getting even or getting frustrated. That's our broken condition, unfortunately, which is a reason that we have to be forgiving and loving. But regardless of where you form your relationships, people will always be people. And that's a discouraging thing for us as well, because we're broken. However, when we form our relationships within the church body, they become a little bit trickier because we expect the outcome to be different. And two things that I need to clarify. Not everybody that is within the church is part of the church body. Jesus says, many will say, Lord, Lord, we have, and they will talk about the things that they did, and Jesus will say, depart from me, I never knew you. Right? So it's people who identify as Christians that ultimately are not. The second thing is, this is a painful truth. People within the church that are really striving to live for Jesus will hurt you. And it's a difficult thing to swallow. The interesting thing is somehow we would rather be hurt by people at the bar than people at the church. And to some extent, I understand why. You know, they're broken people. Well, you should know better. But at the same time, there's more to it. And as we're doing life as a church, remember that just like you are in a faith journey that should yield markers, and if you're not seeing yourself growing and if you became stagnant, there's an issue. But understand that there are others within the church, not all of them, like I said, because not everybody that comes to church is a Christian, but there are others within the church that are in the same journey. They're trying to strive to live for Jesus. And for this reason, Colossians chapter 3, verse 13 encourages believers who make up the church to make allowance for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. The church is not about waiting for people to screw up so you can ditch them and be done. It is a gathering that is meant to encourage us to address the issues in our lives. But understand this, it's by applying wisdom that comes from biblical teaching to every part of our lives and pointing broken people to Jesus. That's what we're here to do. Unfortunately, what tends to happen is that when the people in the church hurt us, and I'm guilty of this, rather than living up to the design of learning to love and forgive, and once again, I'm guilty of this, we disconnect ourselves from the very place that we are intended to be encouraged from. And this is what Hebrews chapter 10, verse 25 states. Let us not neglect our meeting together as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near. I'm just going to be super raw and honest as we close up today. I'm probably going to say something that everybody in the room is thinking, but people suck. That's the best way that you can put it. And sadly enough, I know how I've blown it too. I'd be lying if I said that I always feel like coming to church. Like I said, I'm going to be super raw and honest. I'd be lying if I said I wanted to come to church this morning. I'd be lying if I said that it's easy to lead the church because sometimes it feels like you're herding cats. But here's the thing, out of every place that we experience hurt from, there is no other environment that we ditch faster than the church. I once heard someone say that people are hurt by friends in the bar, but it doesn't prevent them from going back. And unfortunately, that is the truth. So let me wrap up with this encouragement. Whether you have failed at being a friend worth having, or had a friend who failed to measure up to their design, let me finish with this encouragement. Choose wisely in who you are opening up to. Choose wisely in who you put into the friend category that is worth having. Be the friend that is willing to hurt when it's needed for the right reason, but also be loyal enough and willing to stick around when things get messy. And let the criteria based on what will lead you to live wisely be the Bible. Pick your friends wisely enough that it will prevent you from plunging into foolishness. Let's pray.